12. The helpful machine. When software started to act like someone. The prediction, what we thought. At the end of the 1990s, a quietly ambitious idea took shape. Computers would stop waiting for instructions and start helping proactively. Instead of rigid tools that required precise commands, machines would become assistants. They would understand speech, anticipate needs, manage schedules, answer questions, make suggestions. Over time, interacting with software would feel less like programming and more like conversation. These systems wouldn't just execute tasks, they would collaborate. In this vision, technology would finally adapt to humans rather than forcing humans to adapt to technology. You wouldn't need to learn interfaces, you would simply ask. The computer would listen, interpret, and respond. Standing in 1999, this sounded futuristic, but also strangely intuitive. If machines were getting faster and smarter every year, why wouldn't they eventually learn to help? Weyg's prediction made sense in 1999. To appreciate how radical the idea of a virtual assistant was, it's important to remember how unhelpful computers still felt at the turn of the millennium. In 1999, computers required explicit instructions. Interfaces were menu-driven, rigid, and unforgiving. Voice recognition existed, but was inaccurate and frustrating. Search engines returned lists, not answers. Automation was brittle and rule-based. Using a computer meant thinking like a computer. And yet the limitations were already visible. Processing power was increasing rapidly. Early speech recognition systems worked, sometimes. Search engines were improving, calendar software existed, email filters were emerging. If these pieces could be integrated and made more intelligent, the idea of a helpful assistant didn't feel absurd. This belief was reinforced by the broader emotional climate of the late 1990s. New millennium was expected to be not just more powerful, but more humane. Technology would reduce friction. It would simplify life. It would take care of tedious tasks so humans could focus on more meaningful ones. For younger readers today, it's worth stressing how unfamiliar conversational computing still was. Talking to a machine felt awkward. Trusting it felt risky. The idea that people would casually ask software for advice or rely on it daily would have sounded optimistic at best. But the desire was already there. Who said it, and where? One of the most explicit and confident proponents of this future was Ray Kurzweil in The Age of Spiritual Machines, 1999. Kurzweil predicted that by the early decades of the 21st century, computers would understand natural language well enough to act as personal assistants. They would manage schedules, retrieve information, and interact conversationally. Over time, these assistants would become increasingly integrated into daily life. What made Kurzweil's predictions distinctive was their specificity. He didn't merely suggest that software would improve. He described machines that felt useful in human terms, responsive, contextual, and increasingly autonomous. At the time, this bordered on science fiction. But it was grounded in Kurzweil's belief that exponential growth in computing power would eventually overcome the brittleness of early AI systems. What actually happened, 2000 to 2025? Virtual personal assistants arrived, but on a longer, more uneven path than expected. The early 2000s saw incremental progress. Better search engines, improved spell checking, basic automation. Assistants existed mostly in the background, embedded in software rather than personified. Then came a shift. Voice assistants entered mainstream use in the 2010s. Speaking to a machine became normal. Asking it to set reminders, play music, check the weather, or answer simple questions no longer felt strange. The interface softened. Interaction became conversational. The real transformation arrived later, with the emergence of large-scale language models. By the early 2020s, conversational AI systems could answer complex questions, summarize information, draft text, reason through problems, maintain context across interactions. For the first time, software didn't just respond. It participated. By 2025, millions of people interacted daily with the AI assistants for work, learning, planning, and creativity. These systems became tools for thinking as much as tools for doing. The line between interface and collaborator blurred. The helpful machine had arrived not as a single product, but as a category. Verdict. Status. Realized. Virtual personal assistants are now a routine part of daily life. Conversational interfaces, voice interaction, and AI-driven assistants have become mainstream. Software no longer merely executes commands, it helps, suggests, and responds in human-like ways. The prediction was fulfilled in substance, even if its form evolved more slowly than expected. Why it played out this way? This prediction succeeded because it aligned with a deep human desire to be understood without effort. People don't want to learn tools. They want tools to learn them. Technological progress eventually made this possible. Improvements in data availability, machine learning, and processing power transformed brittle rule-based systems into flexible, adaptive models. Once machines could interpret language probabilistically rather than literally, the assistant model finally worked. What was underestimated in 1999 was the complexity of human language and context. Understanding speech was not enough. Understanding intent required scale, data, and architectures that didn't yet exist. But once those barriers fell, adoption was rapid. What this prediction teaches us about the future. This case illustrates a broader forecasting lesson. Predictions about interface evolution often take longer, but land harder. The helpful machine did not arrive on schedule. It arrived when infrastructure, data, and social comfort aligned. When it did, it reshaped expectations almost overnight. In 1999, a talking assistant felt futuristic. In 2026, it feels increasingly unavoidable. The future didn't just give us smarter tools. It gave us software that behaves like a participant. One sentence takeaway. We predicted machines that would help us and ended up with software that listens, responds, and increasingly thinks alongside us.